Good morning, everyone. Good rainy morning, perhaps I should say. We are so pleased that you're with us today. My name is Marcia Latta. I serve as Vice President for Advancement here at the university, and I am curious how many of you are first-time attendees to Fridays at Findlay? Several. Okay, great. One of the things that I love to see is no matter what the topic is, we have some individuals who are here consistently. They love hearing, a variety of topics. And then every single time, we also have some brand new individuals who come to hear about a particular topic. So welcome. We're delighted that you're here. This is the very end of the spring semester. And at this time next week, lots of things will be happening with festivities leading up to graduation, which of course is what it's all about. We're delighted when the incoming freshmen come every year in August, and we so look forward to 4, 5, 6 years later when they get ready to march through the arch, back out through the arch, and graduate. And I am curious if this morning we have any soon-to-be graduates. Brittany Belts. Anyone else? Well, let's all congratulate her on graduating. Lots and lots of time and effort that goes into that. I also wanted to mention this Saturday, if you are looking for something fun and interesting to do, please come out to our Western Farm out on 68, and the annual horse sale will be going on. This is something our equestrian students do every year, and a portion of the horses, we have about 350 of them, and there are a few every year that are donated to be sold or based on where they are in the herd. And so a portion of those sales go for scholarships for equestrian students, but I will tell you, it's so much fun to be out there and to see the activities. So we would welcome you or your family members to come out 10 a.m. on Saturday for the horse sale. And I wanted to mention one other thing coming up on June 10th. There will be an alumni parent and friends, and so if any of you are not alumni or parents, you are friends, and so you're invited to an event at Top Golf in Auburn Hills. I think most of you probably know that our women's golf team last year won the National NCAA Championship, and Coach Dom and one of the student golfers will be up there to make some remarks as well, and it will be a whole lot of fun. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Katie Fralick to give our blessing for the food we've just eaten. Katie is a sophomore nursing major, and her plan is to go on to graduate in the occupational therapy program. She's also very involved with our campus ministries. And following Katie's invocation, President Fell will introduce our panel for today. So, Katie?
Hello, my name is Katie Fralick, and like Dr. Latta said, I am a sophomore studying nursing, and I will also earn my doctorate in occupational therapy here after graduating with my BSN. When I'm not studying, you'll find me involved in many different organizations here on campus. I help lead a co-ed Bible study with our campus ministry. I give tours from the Office of Admissions, help lead new student orientation, am the president of the Student Nurses Association, and a member of the Students of Occupational Therapy Association, and I'm also a member of STRIDE, which is a group that raises disability awareness both here on campus and in the community. I also have a blast playing on a team in our annual intramural sand volleyball tournament, and I've gotten to go caroling with other students at Christmas time. The University of Findlay has given me an opportunity to passionately pursue my interests and grow in my relationship with God. I know I would not be the same person if I'd chosen to attend a different school, and I truly believe that attending the University of Findlay was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I know that I and my peers will be prepared, like many of the classes before us, to give back to others while having a meaningful life and a productive career. Would you all please bow your heads and pray with me? Dear Lord, thank you for this beautiful morning and for the opportunity you've given us to gather in community together this morning. Lord, please bless the faculty and students at the University of Findlay as we seek to glorify you in our work, our studies, and our interactions with others. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and learn and grow. I ask that you bless our learning, our service, and bless our growth this year. Lord, we thank you for the countless blessings you've given us. Thank you for the food you've put before us, Lord. Please bless it to our bodies, bless those who prepared it, and be with us throughout the rest of this morning and weekend. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
Thank you, Katie. Now for the stars of the show. You may come on up if you like. I'll introduce you as you're coming, and they can guess which one is which. But first, let me thank Premier Bank, our sponsor for the Fridays at Findlay series, loyal supporters of the University of Findlay. In fact, their typical bank colors are blue, so I wore blue and orange for Premier and the University of Findlay. I had to explain that to Rod, but he finally caught on. But we are pleased to have a number of bank officials joining us this morning, so could we give Premier Bank a round of applause? The automotive market has never been an industry in the slow lane, always speeding ahead with new inventions, redirecting us toward new routes, and placing cutting-edge technology on the center of the showroom floor. For decades, Americans have had a love affair with their vehicles, SUVs, muscle cars, compact cars, minivans, or trucks. But pioneering automaker Henry Ford allegedly once said, "If I had asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse." So what do today's drivers and consumers want when they hit the road? So today we have three experts to offer us some answers to that question. Suzie Reineke is Vice President of Marketing and Human Resources for Reineke Family Dealerships at the end, in case you didn't know Suzie, at the far end. An Ohio State University graduate, she is a member of the Ohio Automobile Dealers Association and has held seats on the National Automobile Association Convention Committee and its Next Generation Thought Leadership Committee. In 2017, Suzie was selected as a top 40 under 40 recipient by Automotive News. Alex Bibler is an electric vehicle expert from LaRiche Chevrolet Cadillac. A Findlay native, he has worked at LaRiche for 6 years, including 5 years in the service department before moving to the sales department last May. He has completed various General Motors electric vehicle training programs on servicing and selling EVs, including one at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway last fall. Kristie Dennis is a senior manager in propulsion systems calibration at Stellantis, which includes the Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep brands, among others. A University of Toledo graduate with a degree in chemical engineering, she has been with Stellantis for 28 years, working in calibration engineering, holding positions in drivability, emissions, and onboard diagnostics. Kristie is a global leader of a team that contributes to work in North and South America, Europe, Africa, and Asia. We are proud to bring you together today with this panel of professionals to share with us what's driving the future of the automotive industry. Serving as our panel moderator is our own Dr. Marcia Latta. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fell. And if you're wondering what my area of expertise is on automobiles, I am a driver. So thought that the the view of the end user of the product would be an important one. So why don't we start, and by the way, at the end, we will have an opportunity for questions from the audience, so you can be thinking of your questions. Why don't we start by, it seems like we keep seeing on the news, reading EV, AV, are they one and the same or not? And if they're different, how and why are they different? So take it away.
Sure. So what those stand for, EV stands for electric vehicle, and AV stands for autonomous vehicle. So they are not one and the same. An electric vehicle could also be autonomous, but does not have to be. Likewise, an autonomous vehicle does not have to be electric. Electric vehicle deals with the propulsion or energy that the vehicle uses, where autonomous speaks more to being self-driving, the more it's able to do without driver input.
Okay. Anything further to add on that?
That's a pretty good explanation, very good explanation, I would say. There are different levels of autonomous vehicles, from the adaptive cruise control that we have that will modulate the speed based on the vehicle in front of you, to fully self-driving cars that can get you from A to B without someone in the front seat.
And I think there's, can you hear me?
Not yet.
And I think there's, obviously Tesla has made the news, on autonomy and autonomous driving, but I think it's really important to know that all of the traditional manufacturers are moving into that space as well. Specifically for Ford Motor Company, they have Blue Cruise, which I don't know exactly, what the map landscape looks like, but for a lot of metro areas and like I-75 up toward Detroit, there's certain areas where you can do hands-free. And it ultimately, looks at your eyes to make sure you're not looking all over, and it'll alert you if you are not paying attention. But it is important to notate that the traditional manufacturers are also in that space and working toward the autonomous driving.
Well, let's focus for a few minutes here on the EV, the electrical vehicles. Is the electric vehicle going to be my only option if I go out and purchase a brand new car anytime soon?
I'll speak to that.
Yeah.
It will not be your only option. We sat through a convention or a conference in September, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard Ford's efforts on separating out their business models. So they have the Ford Model E, the Ford ICE unit, the Ford Blue, and then the Ford Pro. So for Ford Blue, they're focusing on the internal combustion engine and building out that side of the business, making sure that they maintain the space of the Mustang and Bronco, F-150, all of your traditional ICE vehicles. So it definitely, especially in rural markets, EV is not going to be adopted as quickly as what you would see in more of a metro market. Have to figure out the grid and all of those different components as well.
So if I were to purchase an EV in the next few years, just some things to know. What happens when the battery goes bad? What do you do?
Go ahead.
So the great thing about, and obviously I can only speak for General Motors, that's who I work for and who I have the most experience with. They warranty their battery systems on their EVs for 8 years or 100,000 miles, which you will find is a lot longer warranty than most internal combustion engine vehicles come with nowadays. So any kind of short-term concern about battery reliability shouldn't be an issue. They're warranted for a very long time. 8 years is a lot longer than most people keep their vehicles. Outside of that, I know General Motors is going to an Ultium-based platform. It's going to be completely modular. That way, if part of your battery goes bad, you're not taking the whole battery out and replacing it as a pack. You're able to replace individual cells, just the affected parts. So they're getting to be more affordable in that way. Like I said, that's only a concern after you go out of that 8-year, 100,000-mile warranty.
So I can add to that, but first I have to do a legal disclosure that I forgot in the beginning. So I work for Stellantis, but I want to just mention that I'm required that I don't speak on behalf of Stellantis this morning, that I'm here sharing my personal opinions and experience based on my experience there, but I'm not speaking for Stellantis. That was the legal disclosure I had to say to be able to join you here this morning. So one of the other things with the battery market, there isn't a plan to landfill the batteries. I think that's one of the concerns, that we're going to have all of these batteries in landfills once they have expired in the vehicle. There is plans to reuse the batteries and then recycle the batteries, like you said, replacing the cells and then fixing them so that they can be reused. In an automobile, when it gets to about 70% effective, that's when we would want to replace them, that you're going to lose enough range that the customer is going to be dissatisfied. So at 70%, we would find a new home for that battery, something in an industrial market where they can recharge it at a rate that is still acceptable for them.
So you mentioned the environmental impact. Let's just dive into that briefly a little bit further. So I heard what you say in terms of their plans so that they don't all end up in a landfill, but for the way that they're constructed right now, so where does the lithium come from, other key materials that are in there, where does that come from, and which minerals can be extracted and reused? So I'm looking at you, Kristie, but chime in anybody else too.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm sure you've heard on the news about the lithium mines, and that right now it's difficult to get enough lithium to build enough batteries to satisfy the needs right now. Everybody is getting into the electrification market. Everybody is increasing the amount of production, and we're all fighting for that same resource. So when we talk about internal combustion engines, we talk about the natural resources that we use, right? Fuel, oil. For the emission systems, we use platinum, palladium, and rhodium, which is also something that has to be mined. So we're right now going through this transition between oil and gas, rhodium, which I don't know if you guys know, it hit like $30,000 per troy ounce several years ago. Just astronomical cost because everybody needed it. We're heading into a market now where lithium is going to be that next resource that we're all fighting for.
And I know on General Motors and on their batteries, they are trying to cut down on the cobalt in the batteries. Cobalt can be one of the quote-unquote dirtier materials in the batteries. So GM is working on, and it is in their Ultium platform. And just real quick, so GM, all of their new EVs will be on the same platform, and it's called the Ultium platform. So if you hear me mention that, it's not a car, it's the actual battery platform that they use in their EVs. And so they were able to cut down on the cobalt in their Ultium batteries by increasing aluminum content. So like Kristie said, this is all something that all the manufacturers are kind of learning, and we've seen how far things have come lately. So as these manufacturers and car brands are working towards better battery technology, it's just going to get better and better, and hopefully get to a point where they're not using any of the quote-unquote dirty materials in the batteries.
Suzie, a question. So if I were to buy a Ford EV, what would that cost me? And what's on the market today, and what do you foresee within a year or so?
Yeah, so the Ford Lightning is between, $65,000 to about $85,000. But I mean, it's becoming a little bit more affordable with all of the tax credits that are coming out. It's a little tough to finagle exactly what tax credit you qualify for. The federal level, they sent out new instructions on how we classify all of that. I know that that's been big industry news as of late with all the price reduction from Tesla, from Ford, from a lot of the manufacturers in the space, but it's definitely, EVs are definitely a higher price point out of the gate, but trying to, as they scale up, Ford Motor Company is investing $11 billion in for a plant in Tennessee. It's going to be called Blue Oval City. So as scale, increases, obviously it'll become a little bit more cost effective. But I know incentives right now are they're trying to make them a little bit more affordable to try to push the adoption rate.
So right here in our general Northwest Ohio heart, how popular are EVs right now?
So I was looking at some of our sales data, and last year we sold about 6,200 vehicles across our organization, and we probably saw a little bit more than 1% EV sales there. So it's not adopting at a high rate in our market area, at least from what we're seeing from the Ford, Chrysler, Nissan, Honda side of things. I think a lot has to do with infrastructure, right? Range anxiety, the Ford Lightning, it goes, if you have the standard range Lightning, you average about 230 miles. For the extended battery pack, you average about 320. So, and then the anxiety of, if you're going for long trips, you have to really plan out what that route is and where you're going to go to charge. And then, on the other side, you can go to fill up your internal combustion engine within 5 minutes, you're in and out of a gas station. That's not the case for an EV. If you have a fast charging station, it's probably 30 minutes minimum. So it's not adopting at a fast rate in our rural communities, more so in the urban markets.
Yeah, so Kristie, tell us, you are in the heart of the auto industry where you are in Michigan. Would you say that that's about similar, or are you seeing a higher percentage?
So I'm not on the sales side, so I don't have the sales data that you have access to. I do know that our Jeep Wrangler PHEV application was the highest selling PHEV in the last year. I do see in the urban markets, it is at a higher adoption rate, right? There's more chargers being put in. There are cities that are supporting that with policy. They will require you, if you do a remodel on your commercial building, they will require you to put in a number of chargers based on the number of parking spots you have. So as those policies feed additional infrastructure, I think the uptake rate will increase, for sure.
Alex, when someone purchases or calls you about considering an electric vehicle, and they say, well, twice a year I drive to Florida or a far distance sort of thing, what advice do you give them about planning for that?
So I think a common misconception with electric vehicles and range is that you'll hop in your car, it'll be 100% charged, and you will drive it until you are almost to 0% battery capacity, and then you'll stop and charge and fill it all the way up. In reality, the most efficient way is to stop and top off when you get to a fast charger. So with the Ultium platform, they're getting up to where you can get almost 100 miles of range in about 15 minutes at a DC fast charger, which is the highest level of charging that they offer. And you can get almost 200 miles in just 30 minutes. So yes, you have to make more stops than you would with typical fuel. But instead of stopping and waiting for 2 hours to go all the way full, maybe you stop off, you need to use the bathroom or get some snacks anyway, you plug in for 15 to 20 minutes, and you just do that. You maybe stop a couple more times, but for a shorter time frame. So it's really not as bad as what people might think at first thought. The awesome thing with General Motors is they include a built-in application right into the car where you can plan your trip. It will tell you when to stop, how long to charge for. So it's really nice. It might have you, drive to Columbus and stop for 30 minutes and get topped up, and maybe it'll have you stop again, you know, somewhere in West Virginia and only charge for 10 minutes. So they make it really, really easy to plan that route ahead of time. And as the infrastructure picks up, I know General Motors partnered with Pilot Flying J to get fast chargers in a lot of their locations, which are already conveniently placed right off of highways. So I think as that starts to expand, it's not going to be uncommon to just be driving and see, oh, there's chargers, just like you do now with gas stations.
So as this emerges and comes into, you know, if it's at 1% now, and one of these days it will be at 10% and 20% and such, what happens to the value of the used internal combustion engine car? What's the forecast on that? Will there be a market for my used car?
I personally think it's going to be, there are plenty of people that are not ready or don't want to go the EV route, which is great. Like Suzie was talking about earlier, GM is the same way. They're going to have options. You know, it's not going to be you walk into a Chevy dealer and you're stuck with electric. It's just going to be the salesman might ask you, hey, are you interested in electric or gas, and kind of go that way. So I think that there's definitely still going to be a market for used internal combustion engines for a long time.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, as we look to like our younger generation, because I know that was another topic, you know, our younger people driving, are they getting their license and whatnot? And I think that becomes more of an affordable option for them, is the internal combustion engines on the used market, but they're definitely not going away. Again, Ford is investing heavily in the ICE product, and I definitely don't see the values decreasing substantially.
And I would say when we talk about electrification, it doesn't mean fully electric vehicles, right? That is a component of it, the fully electric vehicle. But a lot of the electrification are hybrid electric vehicles. So vehicles that still have an internal combustion engine, but also are either powered dual by battery motors and the internal combustion engine, or I believe it's the Prius that has it's always powered by motors, by electric motors, but the internal combustion engine charges those batteries. So it can run at peak efficiency. It doesn't have to worry about driving the car with the engine. It just has to act as a generator, like you might have in your home. So it turns on to charge the batteries when they need a top off, and then turns off when it doesn't need it.
Let's transition a little bit. We've been talking EV. Let's transition to AV on the autonomous. And Suzie, you know, you kind of touched a little bit on describing, I think Kristie, you did too, some of the components that are being used right now. And let's talk, are any of you actually selling fully autonomous vehicles yet for average Joe off the street looking to purchase a car?
Not on a level like that where you could walk in and buy one. Similar to what Suzie was talking about, General Motors has what they call Super Cruise, which would be considered semi-autonomous driving technology. It is also a hands-free driving technology, but unlike a Tesla that is using strictly sensors and cameras and LiDAR and radar and things like that to drive on any given road hands-free, Super Cruise is using pre-programmed map data. So it is something you're able to take your hands off the wheel. It is able to keep you in your lane and drive and slow down and speed up with traffic. It's even getting to the point where you can hit your left turn signal and it'll merge or change lanes for you. But again, it's not fully autonomous because it is using map data as well as cameras and LiDAR, but it's not strictly using the environment. It's got a pre-planned route. I know General Motors and really a lot of the car manufacturers these days do have partnerships with fully autonomous vehicle companies. General Motors has a subsidiary called Cruise that actually is a driverless taxi service. It is currently just in San Francisco right now. It's been testing since 2021 and recently passed over 1 million miles driven without a driver. And I know that other manufacturers have similar companies, so the technology is definitely being worked on, and the car manufacturers are heavily invested in it. And we see a lot of the semi-autonomous features already in cars.
Absolutely, yeah, it's so similar. You know, I mentioned the Blue Cruise. I think it's important to notate on an autonomous level. I think fleet adoption is definitely ahead of where consumer adoption is. I think there's still a lot of technological components that they have to build out before that becomes mainstream. You know, we have to think about congestion on the roads, you know, trying to find parking spaces, or are vehicles just going to continue driving, you know, as you're having dinner and all of that. So I think there's a lot of different components to, you know, really rolling that out. But Ford Motor Company has a partnership with the Domino's, you know, with pizza delivery. So I think from the fleet perspective, to Alex's point, I think you're going to see a lot more of that adoption on that scale versus at the consumer level right away.
Kristie, tell us what you're seeing on the engineering side.
Well, we're certainly building our infrastructure, the engineers, the people that make the decisions that the car will eventually make, right? It all comes back to a person that had to write the code so that the autonomous features can work properly. And we're building that infrastructure to continue to test and improve and make it safe.
So when you mention coding and such, it seems as though anytime something goes wrong with a vehicle in our household, it's something to do with a chip somewhere, right? So when it comes to the type of repair, folks, you know, used to, if a retail shop was hiring an auto repair person, they usually needed to be very mechanical minded, right? Put up the hood, etc. What sort of background are you looking for when you hire today's auto repair individuals? And where do you get them? Is there a shortage? Is it something that, a career that people may want to consider? So any of you can take that.
Yes, vehicle technicians is a field that is in extremely high demand right now. Things are changing drastically. I'd say the number one quality would just be a willingness to learn. It's not like it was growing up fixing cars with maybe your dad or your grandpa in the garage. Things are a lot different. It does require a lot more, I'm not going to say necessarily electrical knowledge, but they're getting to where backyard mechanics, people that do it as a hobby, just aren't going to have the tools they need to properly diagnose or fix these vehicles, just due to the amount of microprocessors and computers and chips and all of these words you hear. I mean, they're just, cars are full of them these days. So yes, it is in high demand. I think if somebody was willing to learn, the manufacturers, for the most part, will provide all of the training. You know, they just need somebody that's willing to learn, and they'll teach you, you know, how to work on them. So,
yeah, master certified technicians, I mean, they're in high demand, and those are really few and far between because they either are very comfortable or have had an extended period with their current employers. So we're working on a program with career tech schools in the areas, trying to recruit young and then get them in that process of sending them off to the Ford training and really developing their skill set there. But vehicles today, to your point, they're computers. Yes. You know, our technicians have to be really up to speed on the latest technology and diagnostic trends, and they're still working on, you know, that 1999 vehicle, but then also have to understand, you know, what the technology and what specifically these electric vehicles are comprised of. I was talking with my fixed operations director yesterday, and the investment that we've had to make, you know, you mentioned chips, but I kind of go to the EV side. The investment we've had to make from just an equipment perspective in our shops is huge. We've had to invest $100,000 with specific lifts and even more than that for training to make sure these guys and gals are safe when they're working on these vehicles. You have to when an electric vehicle comes into the shop, they have to identify that that's an electric vehicle and then turn off a component so that they don't go one step too far, because these technicians, they can lose their life if they are not properly trained. So it's extremely important to us, but from, you know, a recruitment standpoint, we try to develop young and get them into our system and then really grow that relationship so that they can become master certified in a quick manner and then have a long-term career with us.
Very interesting. Kristie, anything you want to add on that?
From a service standpoint, I don't have much to add.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I will say I have seen the misconception that the electric vehicle will actually kill the career of a mechanic. But electric vehicles really differ in their engine and propulsion systems. Outside of that, they still have suspension components that you'd find on a regular internal combustion car. They're going to need tie rods. They're going to need shocks and struts. They have window switches inside, just like your car, that are going to go bad and need replaced. HVAC systems are very similar. So while it will maybe change on the propulsion end as far as needing to learn how to work on a battery or an electric motor, there's still a fair number of parts that you wouldn't be able to tell was from internal combustion or electric vehicle. So still going to be plenty of work for the mechanics.
In our audience today, how many of you have an electric vehicle? 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, well, there you have it. I think we've got about 85, 88
that our
people in
1%?
the audience. So we're above average.
How
There you
many
go.
of the
course
hands?
we are.
How many of the hands that were up are on their second EV? Okay. Because what we're seeing a lot in our business, and I think it definitely will continue to grow, right? But so Mach-E was a big seller, but we've seen a lot of trade-ins for our customers going back to the ICE vehicle. So I think it's interesting when you ask who owns an EV, but then, 2-3 years from now, will you still have that EV? Based on the infrastructure building, I can imagine that it'll come with time, but we've seen a lot of trade-ins on these electric vehicles.
So, Kristie, how do you see public policy impacting the auto industry today?
So right now, that's huge. Our government is driving the automotive industry towards electrification with their regulatory proposals. I've seen the regulations since my career started back in the early 90s, push towards lower and lower emissions for the internal combustion engine. About 8% a year, they've been reducing the limits that a vehicle can achieve. And of course, we've added catalyst and we've added precious metals to try to control those. But at this point, with the recent proposal of, I think it's 12 milligrams per mile by 2030, a milligram of emissions, I'll say in 1993 it was 1,300 milligrams per mile. So we've taken it from there all the way down to 10 milligrams per mile as the requirement. For a vehicle with an internal combustion engine, that we don't have the technology to get there. So the only way to meet the requirements of the government is to have electrified vehicles at a rate somewhere around 50 to 60% of our mix by 2030. And that would be required by the government for the company to be able to sell cars. So they're almost pushing us towards that. They're like telling the auto industry what to build, which is different than the auto industry building what the customer wants. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, to see if that is put into law, because it will change what you have available at your dealer to buy.
So every time that I am parking at the Detroit airport, circling, looking for a parking spot, it seems to me that the cars keep getting larger, or I should say the autos, right? More SUVs, more trucks, and they are all larger, trying to get into these tiny little spaces. Is that just my perception, or are people truly buying? Are the auto companies making larger vehicles? And is that what, from a retail standpoint, you are experiencing that people want, regardless of what gas prices are or how long they may have to charge a vehicle up?
Yeah, I'm sure Suzie could speak to this. Trucks are the #1 seller. I mean, trucks outsell all other style of vehicles. And ultimately, it's because trucks can make people money. So trucks will always be popular. Ford has the Lightning. Chevy has the Silverado EV coming out. So, you know, it's not, EVs aren't always going to be small. We're going to see as the battery technology gets better and better that, you know, EVs are going to get bigger and bigger, just like the internal combustion vehicles you're seeing. GMC has the Hummer, which is giant. If you guys haven't seen one, gosh, I feel like it weighs like 10,000 pounds. So, yes, vehicles are big. A Silverado 1500 is bigger than I've ever seen just a 1500 truck be before, but like I said, there's still going to be a market for those big vehicles, and they're kind of working on making the big vehicles electric as well.
Yeah, I think, so from Ford's perspective, I mean, they completely eliminated the sedan. I mean, there's no cars in the fleet lineup at all. So you are continually seeing larger vehicles because they're more profitable for the manufacturer.
It's also what the customers want.
Absolutely.
Right, there's a limited market for the sedan. People want something that they can take the kids to school, but also pack up and go on vacation and have that room.
Absolutely.
All right. With so much of the controls coming through the chips, I'm going back on the chips here, but you talked a little bit on that there definitely is a shortage of auto repair technicians, et cetera. How is the industry working with, say, the technical schools and such on trying to develop future pipeline for repair in this industry?
Yeah, so Ford has a auto technician program, like Top Techs, and then they have a program called Asset where we can engage local career tech schools. You know, like I mentioned earlier, we have our own Reineke program where we're trying to get kids into the pipeline, and career tech is becoming normalized finally, right? The trades, it's a great career path. I mean, we have one of our top technicians is going to made last year $150,000. So, I mean, it's a great career path for these students, but from a manufacturer perspective, they're continually investing in the training. We're continually investing in the training. It's really nice because with Ford, they're offsetting some of our costs. With the state, they're offsetting some of our costs by developing programs to subsidize. So I know our legislatures down in Columbus, they're working on trying to develop, I guess over the course of the next few years, the automotive industry in general is going to be investing about $300 billion into the EV. This is specifically on EV space. It's outside of that though too, but $300 billion in the EV space, and the state is trying to secure some of that, so Ohio is trying to secure some of that business by offering different grants to assist traditional manufacturers with retooling their current production facilities into EV oriented, and then also supplying grants for training because we need people, right? That's what our business is all about. If we don't have the technicians in place to take care of the customer's vehicle, we don't have a business.
So when looking at trends, one of the things that is so interesting is the fewer number of young people who are interested in purchasing or leasing a car. And when I was doing a little bit of research prior to this, I found that among millennials and Gen Xers, about 30% fewer of them own or lease a vehicle today in comparison to the prior generations on the same number. And 30% fewer, you know, that's a lot, right? So any of you, why do you think this is happening? What's causing that trend, and do you see that changing at all?
For me, I would say price is probably the number one thing that's stopping younger adults from purchasing or leasing vehicles. I think the NADA, the National Auto Dealers Association, announced that in 2022 the average new vehicle price was over $40,000, which is a lot. I think if you guys think back about the first car you maybe purchased, was, you know, you were able to find nice brand new cars in the $20,000 range, and just ultimately they're just not that cheap anymore. And so it is tough. Obviously you have things like interest rates as well that have been climbing that are also hurting. So at least as a salesman, that's what I see.
Okay.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the initial purchase price, but then you have to think about, you know, maintenance. They have to register the vehicle. They have to, you know, pay all these additional expenses outside of just the purchase. And I think to Alex's point, the average new vehicle price has gone up, but also the used average vehicle price has gone up. So I think there's a multitude of different factors. But again, I think more so in the rural markets, it probably isn't that 30% decrease, just because given our landscape, right? We don't have easy access to any public transportation. That's building out a little bit more as of recent, but I think that is a key piece to remember, is the rural market is a little bit, I guess, not as quick to adopt.
Kristie, in your area, you're working, you know, very much from a global view standpoint. What do you see?
So, just personal opinion, I think COVID took us into a space that accelerated the work from home, the ability to do your job from home, which reduces the need for mobility. So a couple that may have had 2 cars, someone works from home now, maybe they can get through their lives with only one. So I think that's a contributing factor to it as well, is the need. You know, are there more people living in urban areas where they don't need one? Can they work from home so that they can take that money and invest it in their home or their children instead of into a vehicle?
Well, it's also probably tied to some degree with the last 20 years or so. We've seen the average age of people getting their driver's license creeping up. And it's no longer the, you know, you turn 16 and instantly, what to be sure, you know, or 15 and a half getting your permit, et cetera. And on a national level, that's all true. I don't know from a localized level if you are seeing that occurring as well. But, you know, actually, I know we do have students here who sometimes from a driving standpoint, they'll say, oh, I don't have my license yet, you know, and they're 20 or 21. I mean, it's a small sliver, I think. But 25 years ago, you just wouldn't have found that. So are you seeing that, and what do you think's impacting that delay in getting first license?
I think some of it has to do with anxiety, you know, with driving. From my perspective, you know, I got my license the day I turned 16. My sister got her license because my dad forced her to get her license at 18. So I think it's just, you know, different mentalities, and people are having less kids nowadays too. But I know that doesn't necessarily bode to, you know, pushing out getting your license, but I think there's a multitude of different factors. You know, people are carpooling more now than they have in the past and whatnot. But I think the pushing off the time frame is due to the expense of it, and then also partially anxiety of driving.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I would just have to say, I think the invention of the cell phone has contributed to that. Like,
Yeah.
you have a 16-year-old with a cell phone, they'd much rather sit there next to mom playing on their game or chatting with their friends than being behind the wheel. So I think that has a huge contributing factor to that as well.
And I think I haven't necessarily seen that at my dealership. I think some of these things we hear about national trends, here in Northwest Ohio, we're kind of in our own little bubble, and maybe those national trends don't apply to us as much as they do some of the more urban markets. But kind of like what Kristie said, I think cell phones and the ability to get an Uber or a Lyft or to be able to just text your friend and say, hey, can you pick me up, has just made it a lot easier for young people to get around without having to get a license, without needing a vehicle. Again, I know in our market, we maybe have like one Lyft driver around Findlay, but in even just slightly bigger markets, you can get an Uber ride to school in probably a few minutes on your phone. So,
Well, we are now going to open this up for questions. So you have all given us a lot to think about. And curious out here, who has a question? We have one right over there.
Thank you. From Marcia's consumer point of view, a lot of people with electric vehicles might consider putting a slow charger or a fast charger in their home garage or whatever. Any predictions on the cost of those devices for the consumer?
That's a great question. I'm glad that got brought up. So as far as General Motors electric vehicles, they come with a charging cord. It's called a dual level. It's 120 or 240. It can be plugged right into the wall. And for 80% of EV customers, they are charging at home. General Motors does offer assistance. If you purchase an electric vehicle from them, then they will install a level 2 charger into your home for you. Granted, you got to meet all the conditions of having a good install. Roughly about $2,500 is what it would cost for you to get a level 2 charger in your home. That would get you roughly 50 miles, say anywhere 30 to 50 miles of range per hour.
Great. Next question, Jeff.
So I fill up my car, gas, $40, $50, $60 every time I fill it up. When I plug in my EV, how much is it charge, or what's the charge to me for filling up an EV on the highway somewhere?
So on the highway, at this point, they really haven't developed out the technology, at least from, you might know more, Alex, on that, but they're continuing to develop out the technology on how they best go about charging the customer for that. But from your house, they're saying anywhere from like 19 cents to about 32 cents per kilowatt hour, which would equate to about $10 per charge. But it kind of just depends on, what level charger you're using. Are you using the 180, 240, and what that looks like. But from the perspective on like the state with the gas tax, they're trying to figure all of that out, but you really pay for that up front with your registration fees, which is about $200 plus the base level registration of $31. So.
Yeah, it's really hard to give an exact answer because any given charger could charge whatever they'd like per kilowatt hour. So I think just from the experience of the people coming to LaRiche to charge their cars, they're typically spending roughly $30 to $40 to get a full charge. So I think it'll be very comparable to filling up your gas tank.
Dr. Tully?
Can you use the chargers across different platforms? So can like a GM car charge on a Tesla charger?
Everyone but Tesla. So Tesla does have a proprietary plug, although they have been getting a lot of pushback from federal agencies to conform to everyone else. Everyone else outside of Tesla does have a universal charger, SAE.
Society of Automotive Engineers.
Yeah, I just can't remember the numbers afterwards, but yeah, so you could go anywhere. If you had a non-Tesla EV and you saw a Tesla supercharger station like we have over at Denny's, you're not able to plug into that without, I'm sure they make aftermarket adapters for that, but.
Great. Any other questions?
You all did a great job.
Hi, Cheryl.
Thank you.
Without making a political statement, for anyone who's in this room who has visited India before, would agree until India and China address air pollution, what we may do here with EVs is probably a very small percentage. But my point is, the country which is driven by capitalism, it'll be really interesting to see how long the consumer makes the government hold out. I would anticipate it's going to take a few generations for many to give up their gas-driven vehicles. And something you said, Suzie, about the turn-in rate, really what will that market look like until such time that you can charge these cars in a much quicker period of time? It remains to be seen. But thank you very much.
So I think we will need to wrap this up because I know we always promise folks they can get back to the office at 9, but I am sure that our panelists will be happy to stay for a few minutes. If you have individual questions you would like to ask them, please join me in giving them a round of applause. In preparation, something Suzie mentioned the other day to me that I thought was important that we reference is Henry Ford actually had an electric vehicle about 100 years ago, right?
Yeah, Henry Ford and Thomas Edison created the first electric vehicle in 1913.
Okay.
And ultimately asked the same question that we asked today about, range anxiety and weight of battery. So it's just really interesting, as we look at, disruptors in our industry, we have to also look at the fact that it's evolution based, right? This is not new idea or new concepts. And it was just interesting, to think that in 1913 they made the first fully electric vehicle.
So whatever's old is new again, I guess. So a few things. There are cards on your table for you to fill out regarding today's program. Also, and we do read those and appreciate those, and it gives you an opportunity, if you have ideas for future programs, to put that on there as well. Don't forget this Saturday, if you are interested in something fun and educational to do, the horse sale begins at 10 o'clock out at the Western Farm. And I'd like you to join me in once again thanking our sponsor, Premier Bank, for helping to provide these. Thank you very much.